Lawsuits have been filed against the makers of chemical hair relaxers after decades worth of studies have shown that the chemicals in these products can cause cancer and other very serious health problems in women. But as usual, the industry covered up these dangers for decades, so they continue to make cash. The corporate media continues not to talk. Did you catch that in the story?
Yeah.
Why has corporate media been out at front of this? Because of the companies that are involved. You know, the companies advertising with their nightly news.
Yeah, L'Oreal, one of the biggest ones here.
Yeah, I mean, but that's so typical, isn't it? We can't tell this story, and I say this all the time because I used to do MSNBC with Ed Schultz, and we'd be in the close count. It was insane. We'd be in a close count, and the tickle would be coming up. Mike Papantonio, Ed Schultz talk about Bayer product that's killing women. In between the tickle and the time I'm supposed to go on and talk about Bayer, we get a call all over the ear. Mike, we got to change your story. We're going to talk about constitutional law. Why? Because the company has called MSNBC and said, by God, if you do that, we're going to cut back your advertising. Same thing here. Corporate media is dead, dysfunctional, and died. I mean, they've died where it comes to taking care of consumer issues like this.
Right, and it's only after we get to the point where they have no choice but to cover it, which is exactly what's happened with the New York Times here. And to their credit, this is a great story. I mean, I've actually covered...
But look, this has been around for 15 years, man.
It's going back to, was it 1990? They suspected it in 1995, the researchers, so they spent 2 years. In 1997, they finally came out and said, we just spent 2 years looking at it. These chemical hair relaxers that are marketed to black women across the country, they're causing early onset puberty, they're causing uterine cancer, breast cancer, bladder cancer, all these horrible cancers, and it's because of these chemicals in this product. So these scientists didn't stop there. For the next 20 years, they did more studies. It was like 43,000, more than 43,000 women they examined. And they concluded after study after study after study, these chemical hair relaxers are killing these women.
Okay, you hit it on the head. Okay, what your roundup of that is exactly right. You know, we're handling these cases.
Yeah.
And you go back and look at the documents, they've known forever. There's been small studies out there that have shown forever that, yeah, you know what? Formaldehyde is bad to put in somebody's head because it leaches to the brain. It becomes systemic in the body. Really? They knew that 20 years ago. Okay? People were looking at this 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. There were studies that said this might be a problem. But until the sister study came out, which is an important study, the sister study is an incredibly important study because it makes comparisons. It says two people that grew up together, they use this product, this person didn't use this. What are the differences? There DNA issues? No. There's something that's external. The sister study is extremely important. But the point is, corporate media knew about this a long time. And there were many efforts on our people like us that said, you got to cover this story. And you know who would cover it? It would be the outliers. It would be social media. It would be small organizations, maybe like The Lever or organizations that we go to for real news.
Yeah.
But I don't know why we don't hold corporate media responsible for this kind of stuff. We saw it with opioids, right?
Yeah.
We saw it with PFAS, right? I've seen it with about 80 pharmaceutical companies where we believe that the corporate media is there for us and they're not.
Well, you know, there's also, if I can find it here, something that's also very interesting to me is the fact that we don't have this happening in Europe. No. They have chemical hair relaxers, but here it is. In Europe, the European Union regulates more than 1,300 ingredients for use in cosmetics. Here in the USA, the FDA prohibits or restricts only 9.
Yeah.
So most of these chemicals in these hair relaxers in the United States causing these cancers and these other endocrine system problems, they don't exist in Europe because Europe says, no, we know these will kill people. You can't use them in cosmetics. And the cosmetics companies say, okay, we can actually do it without them. We're just choosing to not do it in the U.S. because it's slightly more expensive.
Yes, it's more expensive. We can make more profit. As a matter of fact, something like 80% of the toxins that are in these hair relaxers that any basic chemist could look at and say, this is bad, 84%, something like 84%, aren't even on the label. they've been saying we're going to hold it secret because it's a fiduciary, it's an interest, a financial interest to us to hold this a secret. So, I mean, but it will never solve this problem. There are thousands of them. You want to hear the cases: uterine cancer, breast cancer. And this was targeted primarily to African American women, right? Because we created this aura that you have to have straight hair. And even leaders played into that. Oprah played into it. Whoopi Goldberg played into it. Michelle Obama, all people that, are kind of, people look at and they say, this is leadership. Let me see what they're doing. And they're just part of the same old story. And this has just perpetuated itself, and thousands of people dying because of it.
Yeah, and there was a time in my lifetime and your lifetime as well where this is the stuff the media would cover. This is what 60 Minutes would tell you about on a Sunday evening. Mm-hmm. Instead, now they want to do these puff pieces with politicians. They don't want to talk about the dangerous products, the faulty products that you buy, the undercover investigation. Remember in the 80s, we had so many undercover investigations of the auto mechanics ripping people off. They don't do that anymore.
Do you have any idea? We launched the tobacco litigation. Do you have any idea? They made a movie over how difficult it was for us to even get the media to pay attention to tobacco. Why? Because the advertising dollars were tremendous. And so they ignored it. And we think we can turn on the news and know, okay, we're going to be told what might kill us, what might kill our children, what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat. We think we're covered. We're anything but covered, Farron. It's outrageous, the lack of sunlight that the media puts on stories like this. Black women have been at risk for decades now, unnecessarily. And we owe it to the fact that we got a media that doesn't give a damn, because dollars is all that matters. And an FDA that doesn't give a damn, because that guy that's making the decision with the FDA is looking for a job with L'Oreal or one of the other companies.
Yep.
Hillary Clinton has a lot to learn about the First Amendment, apparently. During a recent an interview with Rachel Maddow, Clinton said that any American caught using Russian talking points should be thrown in jail. It went beyond that. She said, if you say something that seems to favor Iran, I mean, this is where she's going with it.
Yeah.
If you say something that favors Iran or China or Russia, not only should you be censored, you should be criminally prosecuted. And I know you hate to hear this, because you and I don't know how much we disagree on this, but she, to me, is a political has-been.
Oh, yeah.
That is just here, and we can't get rid of her. She doesn't know that her political career is over. I don't know what she's waiting for. Maybe some big break, some opportunity. But the point to me is that how could she not understand how crazy this talk is? We want to criminally prosecute them. I think of Bill Maher. I think of Jon Stewart, when they talked about, should we really be in Ukraine? Is that a good idea? Well, do we criminally prosecute them because that's a Russian talking point? That's how crazy that statement was.
It really is. And to be honest, I have no idea why 8 years after her, failed presidential bid, why is anybody talking to her or about her? That's what makes no sense to me.
Right.
She is not relevant to what is happening today in American politics. No. She had her chance and she did not succeed. So let's move on as a party. Bringing her back out there, especially this close to an election, when we know people overall do not like her, that was a dumb move. That was a dumb move by MSNBC to even put her in the spotlight. And then she goes out there and says, oh, well, yeah, we had these people who she admits were unwittingly spreading Russian talking points, that big scandal that we talked about recently.
Right.
But then she goes further and says, well, it doesn't matter. We've got to start prosecuting. This is something the DOJ needs to look at. And you can't criminalize the speech. In fact, these people who were spreading the Russian talking points, first of all, they're not even being criminally charged because they did nothing wrong.
Criminally, they did nothing.
Criminally, right.
They did something that she would have objected to. They had some discussion about something Russia was doing that she disagreed with.
Right.
So we throw her in jail.
Yeah.
We throw them in jail because they disagree with what she thinks is proper speech.
Right. And look, I don't like any of those people. I disagree with everything they say. But the people who did get charged were not charged because of the scandal, they were only charged with acting as an unregistered foreign agent.
Right.
Something that, Hunter Biden himself has been accused of, Rudy Giuliani has been accused of. It's something we do a lot.
Well, okay, I used to do a show with Rachel Maddow. It was she had a morning show. I'm trying to think of who else was on that show, but she's the one who
Liz Winstead, Chuck
Liz
D, that's
Winstead,
right.
yeah, Liz Winstead. It says Rachel Maddow, Liz Winstead. They created something called the PAP attack. And I love Rachel. I mean, I've loved her then. But to me, to have taken the time to even allow this nut job to say that on the air and not come back and say, really, Hillary, can you hear how crazy you sound? It surprises me. That's all I'm trying. It just surprises me because I remember the days she would cut right through all that. She said, it's so insane. You're talking about First Amendment issues here.
Yeah.
And you don't seem to understand them. And you ran for president of the United States and lost.